Hello, welcome. And on this seventh week of Pentecost, we're thinking about another of Jesus' parables, this time the parable of the weeds and the wheat in Matthew chapter 13. This is another farming story. Jesus lived in an agrarian society, so it's not really surprising that he used farming metaphors to explain some of the thing about the mysterious nature of the kingdom. A farmer sows his fields with wheat seeds. And lo and behold, as every gardener knows, when they start to germinate, a whole pile of weeds are poked up through the soil. And the farmer's workers want to go and pull out the weeds and get rid of them. But the farmer knows that the roots of the weeds would be completely entangled with the wheat. Pulling out the weeds would just damage the wheat. Who can tell the difference when it's really young? So he tells them to just wait till the harvest. Wait. When the difference between the wheat and the weeds would be blindingly obvious. I think this story reminds me a little bit of the debate raging at the moment about suppression or elimination of the COVID virus. If we go for complete elimination, argue the economists, then the prospect of the economy recovering is bleak. And those that argue for suppression say, well, we'll just lock down for a while and then we'll get things going again. We'll just manage it. We may have to deal with outbreaks, but we'll do that one at a time. And I think there's a lot of question marks over that policy at the moment. Suppression, elimination, who knows what's best? And so it is with weeds in the veggie patch. We can work hard to suppress them, but elimination's always going to be difficult. They'll just keep on reappearing. There's a Peanuts cartoon where Lucy explains to her little brother Linus about the existence of good and evil. She tells him that he, like others, have these two forces, good and evil, inside him. And Linus looks at his stomach with a distressed look on his face and declares, I can feel them in there fighting. And humorous but true. And that's the other side of this parable. We live in a world where good and evil live side by side. Even more complicated, the propensity for good and evil lies inside each of us. And if we take this story as a guide, they're pretty hard to separate. We find this weeds and wheat story in our daily news, good and evil fighting it out in the world. We find stories about all the shocking damage of COVID-19, rampaging through countries. We hear stories of leaders who are more interested in their own power than truly caring for their people. But we also find stories of health workers putting themselves at risk right on the front line day after day simply because they care for their fellow human beings. Weeds and wheat. There's a force that works against what's good and what is God. This force has sometimes been given a name, Satan, the devil, or the evil one. Whatever we call it, force for evil sets out to unmake what God has created and distort and destroy the good. Perhaps we're anxious to do something about it. We'd rather be busy getting rid of evil in the world than sit on our hands. In today's parable, Jesus has the slaves ask the landowner almost immediately whether they should get out there and destroy the weeds. But instead we find Jesus telling us something we really don't want to hear. To leave the judging till later. To recognise that throwing the weeds into the fire and separating it all out is God's job, not our job. And as he so often does, Jesus uses this parable to make us rethink our human reactions. Like Linus in the Peanuts cartoon, we probably recognise in ourselves and in the world in which we live the conflict that Linus experienced as a fist fight in his gut. Yet in the unlikely parable of the wheat and the weeds, Jesus tells us something that's a bit counterintuitive. It's not so easy to separate out good and evil. God is better at it than we are. What does it look like to think this way? Whether it's to look at the horror of terrorism or even the selfishness of not caring for a neighbour in need, what does it look like to look at these things with a God vision that sees even within evil the possibility of good? bound up together. In the conventional wisdom of the world, the teaching in this parable seems a bit crazy and impossible. Suppression or elimination? Regardless of the outcome of the COVID debate, Jesus is giving us a little hint that evil is always going to be with us. But more importantly, that our task is to get on with the good, to do what is right, to turn our hearts to nurturing the wheat that God has given us, and to leave the judging of others to God. The Lord be with you.